Thank you for sharing your gifts with us. What a beautiful, beautiful song and talent. And we are blessed because we have a dynamic duo here with us today, because Ben Jamison is here to give a talk about kindness, and we've already heard it in your voice. Now we get to hear it in yours. Thank you, Ben.
So it's been said that there are only three kinds of people on the planet: those who can count and those who cannot. So we are talking about kindness today. It's an interesting thing to focus on kindness. You know, one of the reasons that I chose this topic is because we could certainly use some more kindness in the world. Perhaps you've noticed. And what we know in Unity and in New Thought is that that which we focus on increases in our life. So by taking some time to focus on kindness, we can bring more of that into our experience and then share it out in the world where it is so needed. Now, when I look at an idea like kindness, one of the things that I love to do is go to the dictionary. I'm a bit of a word nerd, and so I find a lot of interesting wisdom in definitions of words. So when we take kindness and go to the root word of kind and look up the definition in the dictionary, we see that there are two forms of kind. There's the adjective form and the noun, and they're interestingly related. So the adjective form of kind is all about being generous, loving, supportive, those things that we typically associate with kindness. The noun version of the word is all about categorization. So we would say that lemons, limes, and oranges are kinds of citrus. Citrus is a kind of fruit. Fruit is a kind of food. And we very naturally put things into these different kind categories, which is wonderful and very helpful. The problem comes in when we do that to people. And the interesting thing is that if we put somebody into a kind category with which we identify, kindness flows easily and naturally. But when we have somebody in a category that we say is separate from us, kindness becomes more difficult. In fact, it sometimes is easy to be unkind to those kind categories that are separate from who and what we are. So I want to take some time today to focus on how we put people into these different categories and what we can do about that. Now, another interesting thing about looking at kindness in this time of year is that the holidays often involve family getting together. And sometimes when family gets together, we need some extra attention on kindness, yes? Maybe you had some experience of that with Thanksgiving a few weeks ago. I certainly did. I learned a lot about kindness on Thanksgiving. I'll be sharing about that throughout the talk today. But the interesting thing about families coming together is that often that involves travel. And we can look at travel not just as going from one place to another, but travel as part of our spiritual practice. Mark Twain said it best when he said that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. So another way that we can look at it in the context of today is that travel in our consciousness helps to tear down the barriers that we create when we put people into different kindness categories. So I want to look at travel today as well and how we can use that tool to help us bring more kindness into our life. Now, most of this, as I said, is going to come from the story of my Thanksgiving. I learned a lot about kindness, and one of the wonderful things that we got to experience this year is that we did Thanksgiving very differently. My wife and I decided to spend it with friends rather than family. Well, friends who are more like chosen family. My dear friend Zach, I've known for many, many years. As soon as his wife came into the picture, she was an instant family member as well, just like Sherry was. Their kids are our niece and nephew. It's a wonderful, connected, familial experience. We wanted to spend that with them on Thanksgiving. Well, Zach was spending it with his parents in Oklahoma, and we've met his parents several times, shared many meals with them. They're delightful people. So the idea of our family, Zach's family, and his parents all getting together was rich with possibility. So we eagerly undertook this new experience of Thanksgiving. And one of the wonderful things about this, and one thing that taught me a lot about kindness, was that I got to spend a good bit of time with my 4-year-old niece, Zosha. And Zosha, as it turns out, I'm preparing a talk on kindness, she's working on kindness at the same time. And so the first day that she was there, one evening, we're all sitting around talking, and Zosha decides to announce to everybody that kindness is her superpower. Great superpower to have, right? We often do this thing of, hey, would you rather be able to fly or turn invisible, when we've got kindness available to us as a superpower right here and right now. Anybody think that would be a good superpower to have? Yeah. Who's willing to claim it? Yeah. Go ahead and touch your heart center. Repeat after me. Kindness is my superpower. Together. How does that feel to claim kindness as a superpower? It feels good, right? Empowering, wonderful. Well, congratulations, superheroes. You now have planet-saving work to do. So shortly after Zosha announced that kindness was her superpower, we somehow got to talking about Frankenstein. Who knows how that transition happened, but it does. And Stephanie, Zosha's mom, decided to let everybody know that in the story, the character of Frankenstein's monster actually has a name, and that name is Adam. And I'd never known this before. This was new information to me. And so I decided to test Zosha's superpower. And I said, hey, Zosha, given that his name is Adam, is it kind to call him Frankenstein's monster? And she said, well, no, that's not kind. I said, well, what should we call him instead? She thought for a second and said, how about Frankenstein's friend? Again, wonderful little kindness wisdom from a 4-year-old. Well, I took it a step deeper, because as I started to think about that, I recognized that consciously, when we think about the story of Frankenstein, we know that it's not about a monster at all, right? Adam, this creation, is completely unaware of who he is. He doesn't understand his place in the world. He's not understood by the world around him. They disparage him. They want to harm him. He doesn't know how he fits in with everything. And yes, he makes some bad decisions that cause a lot of harm, but he does that out of ignorance. Anybody here ever made a bad decision out of ignorance that caused some harm? Right? We all have. So when we think consciously about this story, we know that it's not about a monster. It's about somebody who is misunderstood. And yet we so easily and naturally refer to him as a monster. Now you may think, well, of course we do. Nobody knows his name is Adam, so if you're going to have a conversation about Frankenstein, you have to refer to him as Frankenstein's monster, because that's the only way you'll be understood. That's how society knows the character. So if we pull that out of the story and look at our own lives, where do we find ourselves in society or in a certain kind of person that has a specific way of languaging about another kind of person that is maybe disparaging or harmful, but we do it because that's how our people talk about it, and if we don't use that terminology, we're not going to be understood. I have a very easy, low-hanging fruit example for you. Political spectrum, right? Long time ago, seems like a long time ago, if you were to say, oh, someone's on the left or someone's on the right, it was simply a description of their political beliefs and nothing more. But today you hear, oh, those people on the left and those people on the right, and with the venom behind those words, they might as well be saying those monsters. You've heard this? Who's willing to admit they've done it? I certainly have, right? So what do we do with this? Well, let's look back at the story of Frankenstein. What happened to me? I was told that his name was Adam. Now here I am sharing with you that this character, who everybody refers to as a monster, has a name, and its name is Adam. And isn't that interesting? Because we so often refer to him as a monster, it's so much easier to say it than him. Well, now you know this. So the next time you find yourselves in a conversation about Frankenstein, because that happens from time to time, it does, especially with 4-year-olds, you might say to your friends, hey, interesting thing, his name is Adam. Isn't that interesting? He's got a name, nobody knows it, we call it it, we call him Frankenstein's monster, but I'm going to start using Adam and he instead of it. We bring those humanizing terms in that people aren't used to hearing. Then the friends that you have who have now become aware of the fact that his name is Adam and that he's a he and not an it, may begin to share that information with their friends the next time they have a conversation, and it propagates these humanizing, connecting terms rather than the unconscious terminology that divides us. So when we look at the political spectrum, and again, friends, there are so many other kinds of people that we do this to. We can look and explore and find many more. But instead of saying those people on the left or those people on the right, perhaps we say those members of my American family on the left, those members of my American family on the right, or some other unique turn of phrase that brings your consciousness to how you are referring to these supposed other people and makes that united language rather than divisive language. If you do that in the middle of a conversation, you know what the people around you are going to do? They're going to stop, because they've never heard people referred to in that way before, and they may say, well, why did you say the members of my American family on the left? That's weird. And then you can say, well, I noticed for myself that when I say those people on the left or those people on the right, I'm using dehumanizing, divisive language. And I don't want to do that anymore. I want to find a kindness that connects us rather than a kindness that divides us, so that I can feel more kind in myself and that I can share that with others. And so I'm going to use something like my family who is on the left, my American family who is on the right, so we have this kindness that connects us rather than one that divides us. And that will propagate throughout conversations. Other people will pick that up, and we will begin to have naturally this organic spreading of language that unites us and humanizes us rather than divides us. All of this from a 4-year-old who said that kindness is her superpower. Wonderful lessons that we can take on. The other piece to share about Thanksgiving and kindness is this idea of traveling in our consciousness and how that helps to break down these barriers. Before I go into that, I want to preface this by saying that I personally have nothing at all against the military. This is a story about the military. I recognize, even though I wish that we lived in a society where a military was not necessary, I understand that it is. And so since I do not align with that energy, I am grateful that there are people who do, and I bless all of them. But again, I am not familiar with military culture. I don't align with it. I'm not comfortable around it. My dear friend Zach is the only male in his family who is not related to the military. His grandfather was in the Army. His dad is a retired colonel. His uncle is a retired colonel. His cousin went to West Point. So there's a lot of military culture in his family. And in fact, Lawton, Oklahoma is home to Fort Sill, which is one of the largest Army posts focused on artillery in the country. So big guns, big cannons, right? And so we got to have a tour of Fort Sill led by this retired colonel. And so to begin with, because I'm not comfortable with military culture, right, I am already uncomfortable pulling up to this Army post. But I'm traveling. I am intentionally going in consciousness from a place where I find disconnection to a place where I can connect. So I am aware of my discomfort. The first thing we have to do is get passes to get on the post. And so we pull up to the Visitor Control Center. Not the visitor center, the visitor control center. And so my issues with authority are suddenly triggered and going in high gear, right? I'm uncomfortable and now you want to control me? What? So we go through that whole process. We get our passes, we get onto the post, and one of the first places we go is to a cemetery. And on this cemetery is the grave of Geronimo and his family. After they were defeated, they were brought to Fort Sill, where they lived out the rest of their lives and were then buried. Now, we had just come a few weeks before from the Parliament of the World Religions, where Sherry performed. This massive event, 10,000 people from all over the world, 200 plus religions represented, coming together in this interfaith experience. And one of the main focuses of that was the First Nations of the Americas and the atrocities that were done to them and how we can reconcile. So those were very present in my consciousness as I'm standing at this monument to the atrocities that were done to the First Nations of this country. And my brain did an interesting thing. It said, by God, I am so glad that my family came to this country after that was done, so I don't have that in my lineage. Do you see the two kinds of people that I created when I did that, and how unkind that is? On one hand, you have the kind of person who doesn't have the genocide of the Native American people in their lineage, and on the other side, you have the kind of person who does, as if that has any bearing on the person that I'm sitting right in front of today. And yet my brain did that, put this big separation between me and these supposed other people, blocking an experience of kindness. But again, I was traveling. I was conscious of what was happening. I paid attention. We continued the tour. We came to what was known as the Field Artillery Museum, which was basically a very, very long row of increasing sizes of cannons. And I learned a lot about cannon. I learned that artillery, some of it is fired with traditional gunpowder, some of it is missiles. I learned the sizes of the cannons, how far they can shoot, how heavy of munitions they can carry, how accurate they are. I learned that nuclear weapons can be fired with gunpowder from a cannon. I didn't know this. And I heard how certain pieces of artillery, certain generals had chosen not to put out in the field. And so we were behind in artillery from many competitors in the world, and we had a lot of work to do to catch up so that we could compete. And I'm crawling in my skin, right? Because to me, what I'm seeing in this museum are all of the creativity and the genius and the time and the money spent on destruction and death. And on the other hand, I'm hearing how we need more of it. We need more advanced versions of it. And remember, consciously, I know that in the society we live in, that is accurate, and I am grateful that there are people that can do that work, because I cannot do that work. And yet I did the same thing. Here's the kind of person who is uncomfortable in the face of this weaponry, and here's the kind of person who says we need more of it. Just like, even though we know the story of Frankenstein is not about a monster, we still call him a monster anyway. But the thing was, despite these two kindness categories that I had created that separated us, we shared a kindness that was greater than both of those that united us. And that was the kindness of chosen family. These people invited us into their home. They gave us a place to stay. They paid for all of our meals. They would not let us contribute financially to anything. We were completely loved and cared for regardless of these supposed differences. And because I was traveling, because I was aware of what was happening, I was able to choose into that category that united us rather than that category that divided us. And there's an interesting thing, if you listened to the story, what you heard is that I started out uncomfortable. I then became uncomfortable again. I found more discomfort along the way. See, one of the reasons, friends, that we set up these categories that separate us is because we are uncomfortable. And it's much easier to divide us from somebody else so that we can dump our discomfort on them and blame them for that, rather than recognizing that that discomfort is because it exists in our own consciousness. And that if we sit with it, if we allow it to inform us about where our work is on forgiveness, where our false beliefs are, where the things are that we can do to shift our experience, we have the power to let go of that discomfort. But again, it's easier to push that off on somebody else. So when you find yourselves in a situation where you are separating yourselves from other people, where you have these kindness categories being created that separate you from the experience of kindness, it's time to travel. It's time to go from these little insignificant, really insignificant categories that separate us to the more significant categories that unite us. In this particular circumstance, it was the category of chosen family. Earlier, when we were talking about the political spectrum, it could be the kindness of our American family. Maybe it's the human family that connects us in a certain situation. Maybe we go back to Unity's basic principle number 1 that says there is only one presence and one power, active as the universe and as my life, God, the source of all good, and we recognize that that means that God is my source and your source. So the kindness that we share is the kindness of spirit, and that is insurmountable. There is nothing greater than that. When we recognize the categories that connect us rather than those that divide us, it can be easier for us to be comfortable in our discomfort, to make it okay, to see what it has for us, and to do the growth work to move through it. Now, you may be thinking, well, this is wonderful, Ben, and thank you for telling me that I have to travel. But I'll tell you what, I do this all the time. I'm always the one who travels. I'm always the one who goes out to other people. When are they going to travel to me for a change? Anybody catch it? The kind of person who travels and the kind of person who doesn't? Well, there's a good answer to that question of why do I have to do the traveling? 2 good answers, actually. The first one is that your superpower is kindness. And so it is your great responsibility to bring that kindness wherever you go. The other answer to the question is because you are aware of the need. The moment that you are aware in your own consciousness that there is a lack of kindness or that you are creating separation, it is your awareness that demands you be the one who travel. And the good news is, friends, that when you do this, when you find that category that connects us and bring yourself in all of your loving acceptance to that other person, that seeming other person, they get to experience you just the same as you get to experience them. And it's not about changing your viewpoint. It's not about getting rid of the areas that we disagree. It's not about justifying any behavior. Because my brain, when I started working on this talk, my brain said, well, great, so I've got to travel. Well, there's the kind of person who doesn't rob from other people, and there's the kind of person who does. So now I've got to make that okay? No, it's not about making things okay. It's not about having to change our view to match somebody else's. It's about recognizing that those things are far less than the things that unite us. And that when we put somebody into a limited category like that, we automatically do the same thing to ourselves. Judge not, lest ye be judged, right? Don't categorize somebody in a limited way, or else you will put yourself in a limited category as well. So friends, kindness is all of our superpower. It's time for us to use that kindness because we need more of it in the world. We can pay attention to when we have language in our groups of people or in our society that is either intentionally disparaging or unintentionally dehumanizing, and shift the way we talk just slightly, ever so slightly. Have that tweak that brings our consciousness to it, and that brings other people's awareness to the fact that the language we use is not kind and connecting, so that we propagate a humanizing, connecting language throughout our society. We can be aware of when we're having difficulty in being kind, or when we're having an ease of being unkind, when we're separating each other into these limited categories, and find that kindness category that unites us and travel to where that other person is to break down those walls so that we have the wonderful experience of the fatality of our bigotry, prejudice, and narrow-mindedness. And we do this because we are aware. And so now that you are aware, friends, enjoy your travels. Namaste.